Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And before we get started, we've noticed that about half of our audience that watch this are subscribed and the other half are not subscribed. Sometimes you can forget, you watch a lot, but you don't actually subscribe. We're actually aiming for a new milestone of 200,000 subscribers. So if you like the content, make sure that you can help us get to 200,000 subscribers. But let's get into it. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh. If you are new around here, and on this channel, we explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. And it's been a while since we have sat together, just you and me, to discuss South African politics. We have done so many interviews. I know many of you have watched, commented. Our episode with Vusi Tembekwayo is doing very well. Helen Ziller as well. We've been on quite the run recently, and it's all because this SMWX family is giving this channel so much support that we are able to get better guests and more interesting content for you. And that's another reason why we just want to keep growing this channel so we can make it bigger and bigger. My hope is actually to even start doing some more global content next year, especially with South Africa hosting the G20 summit. So the more you support, the more we can do around here. And it's been wonderful to watch with you and be with you on this journey this year. So, my goodness, never a dull day in South African politics. And right now, I want to think through together what is going on at the moment, because there's a fascinating conjuncture between the EFF's National People's Assembly, the South African Communist Party's Special Congress, the fifth one that they're holding, and then the MK Party's first birthday celebrations. And at the close of this year, I think this is going to tell us quite a lot about what 2025 holds. And stay tuned, because I want to give you a theory of what I think 2025 is going to be about in South African politics. So I'll start with the EFF, go on to the SACP and then MK, and then draw some conclusions. So, my goodness, the EFF's much-awaited National People's Assembly is currently underway. And I thought I'd just give you some of my thoughts about it. Sadly, we were not accredited for the National People's Assembly, which was disappointing, to say the least, because it would have been lovely to be there. We've been to so many events this year, party events, parliamentary events, but it's all good. We don't feel entitled to attend any functions. But look, I think the EFF, after the interview with Floyd, is not sure. They feel that that conversation really damaged the EFF. But I've still got a lot of love for the EFF, and I'm sure in time they'll come back on the platform and all that. So I've already spoken about that. I saw that they have mended fences with ENCA, which I think is great, and actually, Julius Malema has actually gone on various podcasts as well, which I think is good. I think any political leader in South Africa should realize that digital media is here to stay. And whatever podcast and whatever platform they go on, that's great, because we're all building this digital media thing together. So I watched the Mashabela interview, the DJ Spoo interview, shout out for that. And it's good to see the EFF going on all those platforms. So let's talk, quite apart from the channel and the EFF, about this National People's Assembly, because I think it's actually an important moment in South African politics and for the EFF. And the first thing I would say is that optically and from an organizational perspective, this National People's Assembly is a good thing for the EFF. The EFF knows how to organize the heck out of an event. We've seen their rallies, we've seen their internal events, and they pride themselves on getting the details of their events right. And clearly, as a spectacle, this National People's Assembly is effective and puts the EFF back at the center of the national conversation at a time when it has in some ways been on the back foot, particularly since the high-profile departures from the EFF's ranks to MK Party. So I think they've done well to put on an effective, well-coordinated and well-organized show. And Julius Malema delivered his political report today, and there were a couple of things that I found interesting that he mentioned. The first is that, of course, he spoke about the ideological position of the EFF, and I've looked at that in some detail. But what I found interesting were his remarks on unity because the EFF really is standing at a crossroads at the moment, which is, does it go with MK Party and try to form some kind of amalgamated opposition alliance? Or does it stay independent of both the MK Party and the GNU and try to forge a kind of third way where it neither partners with one nor the other and just focuses on building itself? Or thirdly, does the EFF consider entering the GNU, so-called, particularly if the relationship between the ANC and the DA hits the rocks, and then the ANC would choose to dispense with the DA and bring the EFF in? So the EFF's at a really interesting time now where I think all those options are open before it, and some of the strategic conversations that will be happening at the National People's Assembly will be the most important of the EFF's life, because the EFF will have to decide for the next period in our politics, where is it going to position itself to optimize its potential for growth and indeed potentially slow a decline after what was a pretty difficult year. So I was listening very carefully, and Julius Malema came out on a similar footing to really dispose of this idea that the EFF currently is considering any kind of partnership with the MK Party. He wasn't quite as aggressive in his language as he has been before, but he has clearly said that this idea of unity, which the MK has been punting, is potentially a facade where the EFF would be condoning some of the problems of the MK Party under the guise of unity. At least that's the message that he was trying to get across. So what we're hearing from the EFF is clearly that although the MK Party itself is keen and is making overtures, unifying overtures, it's clear that the EFF is not responding in kind. And that sets up an interesting moment and dilemma. Here's what I think is going on. I think that ideologically, and in terms of the coalition politics, the EFF is being pushed towards MK Party, right? They weren't let into the GNU arrangement, or they didn't want to be in it with the DA. MK Party is speaking a similar language, let's say, to the EFF, a similar policy language, certainly on things like land and nationalization, etc. So some of the structural dynamics, if we can call it that, but for lack of a better word, just the overall thrust of South African politics right now means that the EFF and the MK find themselves in a similar position. And of course, they're in what's called the Progressive Caucus together in Parliament. But the interpersonal dynamics are pushing them apart. It's clear to me now that there's some real bad blood between the EFF and MK Party, and that the antagonistic personal relationships are militating against allyship or coordination. So it's an interesting question in general whether the structural forces will end up pushing them together, or whether the interpersonal antagonisms will actually end up pushing them apart. And that is an open question right now, which will probably unfold in 2025. But it seems clear to me that the EFF is still dead set against any kind of formalization of their relationship with MK beyond Parliament. And indeed, that the Progressive Caucus itself will probably be on the table, whether they want to persist with that or whether they will actually break from that. And as I say, go into this kind of independent mode where they're neither GNU nor Progressive Caucus, but they just focus on them. So that I found interesting, that seems to still be the posture. Of course, another talking point around this has been the absence of Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, a politician that I respect quite a lot and who's also come on SMWX before. And of course, this has been a little unfortunate for the EFF because they want the conversation to be about moving forward, their policies, what they do, the election of their leadership. And of course, the situation around Dr. Ndlozi is creating a certain a certain diversion of attention from what's going on at the EFF. Look, I don't have any special knowledge of what's going on there, but it does seem to me that there has been some kind of break. And so certainly after this National People's Assembly, it'll be interesting to watch what Dr. Ndlozi is thinking himself, and where he chooses to go. But of course, it's quite sad to see that someone who's quite popular within the EFF, who's kind of come up on this journey with them, is just not there. But what I would also say is that it's important not to write the EFF off too early. And I've said this consistently, that Julius Malema and the EFF still hold some political sway, and it's not going to disappear overnight, right? Yes, they went backwards in this election very slightly, but they command around 10% of the electorate. And so that's a serious political force. And to dismiss it and imagine that it's simply going to dwindle because a few key senior leaders have left is probably quite short-sighted. What I would do, if I were in the EFF's position now, is I would say, look, we've got a new generation. What this break has, and this rupture has actually opened the space for a new generation to come in. Your Sinawo Tambos, your Sihle Lonzis, your Vuyani Pambos, who have been close to leadership, but now I think there's a real chance to bring them in right into the center. I think those leaders are very promising. Your Naledi Chirwas, it'll be interesting to see there again. And bringing that younger cohort closer to the center, fresh ideas, younger, more vibrant energy, and give them a chance to lead along with Malema, who at this point is now an older, wiser statesman in terms of where South African politics is positioned, and see what that group of slightly younger leaders can do together. So the leadership question will be fascinating, and we can reflect on it together. What I will say, fam, is that this is going to be our last video that we're shooting for this year. We've still got content coming. We've got a lot of interviews that are going to roll out throughout December, so we've got you covered. But just as a team, we have pushed this year. I think we can all agree. And so I'm not going to review the EFF conference, but what I will say is it'll be interesting to watch what happens with Deputy President, because clearly they're the likes of Marshal Dlamini, who I think is who is exercising sway within the EFF and has probably cemented his position over time. So it'll be interesting to see if that hypothesis holds. What would happen with the SG? Would he stay there? And if he stays there, what happens with the vacant Deputy President position? Is someone promoted from within the current top six? You've got your Veronica Mendes, or do they take someone from outside? And so that deputy position, I think, is going to be quite key. There were ramblings about Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, but I think that we can put paid to those suggestions given what's happened now. So what the EFF chooses to do with leadership, who it retains, which new people it brings in will be something that I will be very keen to watch as the conference unfolds and the National People Assembly moves on. So that's the EFF for now. We joked that this is actually what the EFF is currently doing to SMWX, but don't worry, it won't continue.
Whippy! But better combine.
Fam, I just wanted to interrupt this episode to let you know the 4 ways you can help SMWX. Way number 1, you can invite me to speak at your institution or company. Way number 2, you can advertise on this channel. Way number 3, you can become a member of this channel. The link to the membership is down below. And number 4, you can buy merch, that's books or hoodies. Now let's get back to the episode. All our contact details are in the description box below. Cool. So in addition to the EFF, and in parallel, what's happening is that the South African Communist Party, which is an alliance partner of the ANC, is at its own Congress where it's debating and discussing a whole lot of issues, chief of which is the GNU and whether the SACP will stay with the ANC. And I think this is a fascinating and a very big moment in South African politics, which I would pay attention to. Here's the thing. The ANC simply cannot afford to leave another 1% of electoral support on the table. It's got to the point where the ANC needs every last vote it can get to get back up above 40% in the local government elections and elections after that. So even if the SACP doesn't present the kind of electoral threat that, say, an MK party represents, their recent decision, which was confirmed at this Congress, that they will be contesting the local government elections as a separate entity, is bad news for the ANC. Because it just means that yet another chunk of the ANC is going to go to a different party. And I would be very worried as an ANC leader that another political party that is a direct competitor to us now, and that would be competing for exactly the same voters, could shave off. It doesn't matter if it's 0.5%, 1%, 2%, because that 1% could really hurt the ANC, given where they are at just below 40% of the electorate. In big cities, they need every vote they can get. So I think the SACP, I've seen a lot of people dismissing the SACP's decision, saying that the SACP actually doesn't have a lot of sway. And make no mistake, electoral politics is not easy, and I don't think the SACP will become a majority overnight. But 100,000 votes matters, 200,000, 500,000 matters to the ANC right now. They need to be winning votes back, not shedding votes. Vote shedding? So we've got to make sure we keep our eye on that. And for the SACP to confirm they're contesting the local elections, here's what I think is going on there, though. And it's interesting because what the SACP has said is not that we are contesting all elections. They've said we're contesting the local government elections in 2026, or there could be 27. Why is that interesting? Here's what I think the SACP is going to do. They're now playing hardball with the ANC and saying, okay, we've tried to play nice. We've said, let's have meetings, let's reconfigure the alliance, in this famous phrase. The SACP has a lot of grievances, and to be quite frank, the ANC has blue-ticked them for a long time, right? They've kept them at arm's length, promised them that they will have influence over government, but really, when you look at it, the SACP hasn't been treated as well as they would like to by the ANC. So what the SACP is, I think, going to do is they're going to contest 2026, and they're going to turn around after that election to the ANC and say, see, we have now hurt you where it matters most electorally. Either we really reconfigure this alliance, or we're just going to keep hurting you electorally. And so this could be in some ways a bargaining chip to come back to the table, maybe after the local elections, and say, look, we don't want to keep hurting each other. Let's come back together, but on these terms. And the SACP would put those terms down, and the ANC would probably have to listen to them more than right now, where the SACP doesn't really have a way to leverage change in the ANC apart from just making statements. So I find that quite interesting. And a number of things happened at the SACP Congress that I would point out. Firstly, the presence of former President Thabo Mbeki nearly knocked me off my chair, because he doesn't often attend SACP events. And for him to be there at a time when the SACP is taking these monumental decisions to really break away from the ANC in a meaningful way, I don't know exactly what's going on there. But to have Mbeki there at that time said to me that there's something more serious going on here than just an SACP breakaway, that a serious realignment may be underway, and maybe ANC leaders have underestimated the extent to which partnering with the DA has affected some of its base. You know, we've had people like Tito Mboweni, may his soul rest in peace, a great liberation hero and one of our great politicians, you know, saying, and we saw correspondence from him where he's no RET MK person, right? Saying this is just wrong. It doesn't feel right. People like Ngwako Ramatlodi coming out. We've already had Sali Mapaila, Banyaza Lesufi. And Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was also at the SACP event. And so it felt to me like almost a coming out party of those who are skeptical of the GNU arrangement. And that coming out party is a little bit more powerful than I expected it to be. It's a little bit more confident than I expected it to be. A Bladen Zimande, who usually chooses his words very carefully, actually saying, look, we as the party, this is a minister in the GNU speaking. We don't like this arrangement. It wasn't our choice, but, we live with it nonetheless. Now, two further people spoke, which I think we need to pay attention to. Panyaza Lesufi, why does that matter? He's also been on the channel. It was a big interview. Because he is leading the charge within the ANC, particularly in Gauteng, against this ANC-DA alliance. So when he gets up and speaks at an SACP event, what you see is different strands who are opposed to this GNU are starting to find each other and come together. And the last time we saw this was, at the end of most second terms of an ANC president, you then start to see these movements bubbling up. I saw it in Polokwane, but I also saw it at the end of Zuma's term, where, remember, the SACP started getting very vocal about how they didn't support Zuma. For Paul Mashatile to lead the ANC delegation to the SACP Congress is also interesting for two reasons. Number one, because Mashatile was there, and we have a clip of him singing along to a song about the SACP effectively saying, we don't want this GNU. Asifuni GNU. And he actually starts clapping and then he starts singing it. And I was like, wow, that is interesting. So have a look at this. It's also interesting for a second reason, which is that Cyril Ramaphosa was not there. He's been to SACP congresses before and events. In fact, the SACP supported his candidacy in various elections. But clearly, he was not welcome there this time. And so what it says to me in sum is that from Lesufi to Mashatile, who themselves wield a great deal of power within Gauteng, but also in other parts of the ANC, to the SACP, now add Kosatu, whose deputy leader, one of their deputy leaders, Mike Shingange, also wasn't committal about whether Kosatu would support the ANC or the SACP in 2026. Now, if Kosatu comes out and says we're not supporting the ANC in 2026, that is potentially fatal, honestly. Kosatu is not what it once was, but that could be serious. So what we're seeing is the birth of a movement that is the reaction to this GNU arrangement. The only question that remains and is currently unfolding, and which I think will be the question of 2025 then, is how big is that movement? It's easy to look coordinated at a set-piece event like a Congress, but we know that there are many in the ANC who also support this GNU. So what we will see next year as the ANC goes to what's called its National General Council, a big meeting where they discuss policy and strategy for the party, is how big is this counter movement? Because at the moment, I must say, it looks a bit bigger and more coordinated than I expected. However, it remains to be seen whether it can actually turn the tide within the ANC. And don't forget that President Ramaphosa still wields a lot of power, even if he's fallen out of favor with certain pockets of the ANC and the alliance. So all of this then also happens, thirdly, against the backdrop of the MK party's 1-year anniversary. And I must say, on this channel about a year ago, as soon as President Zuma, former President Zuma, announced the MK, we did a video, and I'd encourage you to go back there because we said this is going to be big. This is going to be big, and I think we've been proven right. This year there were many stories: the election, the ANC's performance, the GNU, but certainly a contender for biggest story of the year was just the rise and rise of MK Party. MK Party is just a fascinating political phenomenon. In some ways, on the surface, it looks really chaotic. Leaders are changing. Entire parliamentary caucuses are being shifted and changed and chopped and changed, and different SG and different leadership. But also, there's a certain underlying stability, and there's a certain style of leadership that we haven't seen before, which is that clearly former President Zuma is not playing games. If he sees something he doesn't like, he acts decisively immediately, and it may seem chaotic at first, but I think we have to say that after a year of its existence, the MK Party has so far defied those who said that it would be a flash in the pan, it wouldn't have the staying power to last at least this long, and it's clearly a major force in South African politics a year later. So it'll be interesting to see how they position that launch. It's interesting further to me that the MK Party is not engaging in a back and forth with the EFF. They are preferring to not respond and not fight fire with fire. In fact, even celebrating and encouraging the EFF's anniversary. And I think their hope is that as long as they don't respond and engage in a war of words, then over time, the EFF and the MK will find their strategic cooperation inevitable. But at the same time, because the EFF is obviously quite angry at the MK and doesn't see it as a partner in the same way as maybe MK hopes it would, at some point we may, and Ukoko Aubrey Machikri came on the channel, watch that interview because he said some interesting stuff about how in 2025 what we may actually see is a real conflagration, symbolically of course, between the two if they can't find each other, because what may happen is that MK, even if not the leadership, other members actually start to get irritated and want to respond, and that's where you could really see back and forth, turning ugly. So here's what I think for 2025, as we approach a new political year, what I think is important to think about. There's a scenario in which 2025 is a year of political war. And let me explain what I mean. Of course, symbolically, I'm now suddenly quite attuned to the reach of this platform. So I don't mean violence at all, of course. But what I mean is that I think 2024 was a year where people have been trying to keep up appearances, both inside and outside the government. The EFF and MK had a period of friendship going into the election, where they agreed they wouldn't really attack each other. And the GNU partners, who are historical enemies, had to come together to present a united front. 2025 is where cracks begin to emerge in different parts of the political landscape, I think. And let me start with the GNU. Interesting interview with Songezo Zibi recently. What I thought was most insightful from that is that right now, the coalition government is still implementing old policies up until the budget next year. But when we get to the budget, and I think even from the State of the Nation address, this government is going to have to leave the old policies behind and chart a policy course for the future. And if this year is anything to go by, I think that is going to be a messy and bloody, symbolically, process. The ANC and DA are not designed to work together. The Bella Act has shown us that even on a policy that isn't really even We're not even in the game yet. We're still dealing with historical legacy policies that have filtered through. They just cannot see eye to eye on a basic thing like that, let alone the NHI, let alone foreign policy and questions, intense questions like the situation in Syria, the Palestinian situation in question, Russia, Ukraine, the Trump presidency, let alone economic policy, let alone where money should be spent. Where do we take money from and where do we put money? Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel. So why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. So next year is going to be the true test of this government. And I must say, look, I don't feel confident enough yet to say I don't think the GNU is going to survive until the end of 25. But I am beginning to form a view that I think next year is going to be a rocky, rocky road for this coalition government. The honeymoon will be over. And what we've also seen is that the fundamentals are not in a good place. Unemployment is not looking good. Growth is not looking good. And so while we've had this sugar rush of sentiment and GNU vibes, if this government continues not to deliver on the economic front, by the time we get to June or September next year, people are going to be fed up. So the GNU has its work cut out for it in 2025, not only to survive, but then to deliver. And I would get ready for more policy disputes, more disagreements, and whether the government can hold together on that, I think remains to be seen. However, on opposition benches, I don't think it's going to be any more unified, because we will see a new EFF leadership with a very tight grip held by Julius Malema, who will reform the EFF in his image. And an MK party which will also be resurgent in its second year, looking to make itself as a party. And we may see the two, really battling it out for who is the legitimate opposition voice to this government. And so I think 2025, if we thought there was drama in 2024, get ready for drama in 2025. But guess where the best place to decode, understand all the drama that happens in South African politics is? It's right here on SMWX. And since this is my last video signing out for the year, I want to thank you for a sensational year on this channel, which wouldn't have been possible without you. We started the year on something like 50,000 subscribers, and now we're pushing for 200,000, and we have big plans next year. We're going to go even harder. If you thought we came with episodes this year, strap in your seatbelt, get ready, because 2025 is going to be the biggest year on this channel. And by the time we're done next year, goodness only knows where we'll be with your support. It's been amazing, fam. I hope you, your family, have great holidays. I hope you get a chance to revive and recuperate and prepare for the next stage of SMWX. Have a good one. Aye.